video game shouldn't just be satisfying, it needs to leave us wanting more. When a title concludes with a mind-blowing twist or a sudden death, you feel like you're not ready for the experience to end. But the best way to keep us enthralled is if the game in question ends with a cliffhanger. If a game culminates with one hell of a shocker, we're more likely to check out the follow-up to see the resolution. But we don't always get the answers we seek. If the proposed sequel gets axed or the entire franchise is scrapped, unresolved plot threads can be left dangling forever. However, sometimes the loose ends were tied up, we just didn't notice. We may not have got the answers the way we wanted in some of these cases, but we do know how these stories would have panned out. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 infuriating video game cliffhangers you didn't realize have answers. Number 10. Who's the baby? Shadow of the Colossus. In Shadow of the Colossus, a disembodied being called Dorman informs our protagonist Wanda that he can resurrect his lover Mono if he destroys 16 colossi. After Wanda succeeds in his quest, Dorman shows his true colors and possesses our hero's body. Although Dorman is sealed away, Wanda suffers the same fate, just as Mono awakens. The credits roll, implying the story has wrapped up. But in the closing moments, Mono discovers a baby in the exact spot where Wanda disappeared. Weirder still, this baby has horns, akin to the titular hero of the developer's previous title, ICO. Even though Shadow of the Colossus is shrouded in secrets, many of which have been discussed for decades, it's this ambiguous ending that's generated the most discussion. Since this beloved game has never had a sequel, many gamers are still trying to wrap their heads around what this moment means. However, it does have a simple explanation, which is why it's so low on our list. According to the director Fumito Ueda, this newborn and ICO are one and the same, meaning Shadow of the Colossus serves as a prequel. If players don't like this notion, Ueda said that players can interpret the ending in their own way. Number 9. Who's pulling the strings? James Bond 007 Bloodstone. As sad as it was to watch Daniel Craig's tenure as James Bond come to a close, the same cannot be said about his video game adaptations. The GoldenEye remake didn't come close to matching its predecessor, and 007 Legends might be the worst game ever based on Ian Fleming's creation. Having said that, James Bond 007 Bloodstone was actually pretty decent. Because of the amazing soundtrack, well-developed characters, and creative visuals, it did the franchise proud. And like any Bond adaptation, Bloodstone has its fair share of plot twists. In the third act, the iconic British spy discovers his partner, Nicole Hunter, is a double agent. When Bond confronts her, she reveals she works for a mysterious figure who leads a global terrorist organization. Before Nicole can give away her boss's identity, she's shot dead by a drone. This story would have continued in the sequel, 007 ECCO, but was cancelled after Bloodstone didn't reach its sales criteria. In ECCO, it would have been unveiled that Nicole's secret benefactor was Bond's arch-nemesis and Spectre commander, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. However, most players already figured it out before this was revealed, since, well, who else was it gonna be? Oddjob? Number 8. Lost in the TIMESTREAM. ECCO: The Tides of Time. In ECCO: The Tides of Time, the titular dolphin discovers the Vortex aliens have returned, intending to wreak havoc upon the time stream. Using the power of the asteroid once more, our bottlenose hero faces off against the nefarious Vortex Queen. After supposedly destroying her, your cetacean chums congratulate you before the credits roll. But instead of living happily ever after, the sequel ends on a downer. In the epilogue, the asteroid tells ECCO to destroy the time machine to ensure the vortex never distorts this space-time continuum again. Instead of doing as he's told, ECCO uses the time machine to venture to an undisclosed area. Though this ending seemed to set up another installment, it never came to be. Luckily, we know what was meant to happen, and this is according to the creator, Ed Annunziata. ECCO 3 was going to be about the Atlanteans' war with the Vortex. At the end of Tides of Time, ECCO goes back to help. The most annoying thing about ECCO 3 being cancelled is it causes the player to misconstrue ECCO's actions. Because he didn't destroy the time machine, it looks like ECCO was punished for his disobedience. In reality, our aquatic savior was doing what he always does, protecting the time stream because he's awesome. Number 7. Trapped in Ancient Egypt. Sly Cooper: Thieves in Time. In Sly Cooper's fourth outing, the mischievous raccoon must ally with his ancestors to stop mad scientist La Paradox from taking over reality. The showdown takes place inside a rip in time, with Sly emerging victorious. However, Sly goes missing after the battle, causing his allies to speculate what happened. Despite searching high and low, his comrades can't find their furry friend. But by collecting every trophy in the game, you can unlock a secret ending, revealing Sly has been transported to ancient Egypt. With an ending like this, anyone would assume Thieves in Time was teasing a 5th installment. However, Sly seemingly vanished off the face of the earth, since we haven't seen him in a decade. Although Sanzaru Games intended to continue the story, it would have been in an expansion pack, not a direct sequel. In a 2019 interview with the game's director, Matt Kramer, he explained the DLC would have Sly's squad travel to ancient Egypt to retrieve their partner. He said, "That was always the intention, then we never got to finish that out. The team at Sanzaru, we have the story, the whole episode done on paper form, but we'd love to come back to that world. I hate leaving him there. It's the question we get the most." Sanzaru Games hoped Sly Cooper could have a resurgence of interest after the release of the film and TV series adaptations. But after these projects were cancelled, Sly Cooper hasn't had enough buzz to generate a follow-up. Number 6. What happened to Desmond? Assassin's Creed 3. The original Assassin's Creed centers around Desmond Miles, a descendant of several members of the Assassin Brotherhood. When the Templar learn of Desmond's heritage, they jack him into the Animus, a machine that taps into the genetic memories of the host's ancestors, allowing them to discover the Brotherhood's secrets. Because Assassin's Creed was planned as a trilogy, Desmond was suitably killed off in the third entry's climax. But when Ubisoft saw how lucrative the series had become, they couldn't stop churning out sequels and spin-offs. Even though Desmond is very dead, fans still wondered if he'd make a reappearance. Since the recent installment has explored resurrection technology, fans were hoping the developers would find a way to reincorporate Desmond. Well, after 8 years and 7 sequels, fans got their wish. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, it's revealed that Desmond exists in a digital afterlife, where he's known as the Reader. In his new form, he can read the strands of time, allowing him to find a reality which best suits mankind. Although this plot point is laid bare, many gamers missed it, since, well, Valhalla's trophy and achievement completion percentages are very low. Because Desmond Miles has been absent for almost a decade, it would have been easy to remove him from the modern games entirely. As such, longtime fans appreciated how the developers found a way to bring him back. Number 5. The sequels would have explained everything. LOOM. LOOM follows a young weaver called Bobbin who must save the world from chaos, an entity who intends to reshape the world with a magical loom. Fortunately, Bobbin destroys the loom during the final showdown. But because Chaos had already begun using the enchanted instrument, half the world is under his rule, while the other half is governed by the Weavers. In the ending, Bobbin's allies assure him they'll destroy Chaos in the future. Even though Loom was a singular title, the head designer Brian Moriarty had a ton of ideas for the planned sequels, Forge and The Fold. In Forge, our new hero Rusty Nailbender is inspired to create a movement to destroy Chaos after the demonic beast enslaved his people. The cancelled sequel would have concluded with a show-stopping battle, which would have nearly resulted in the world's annihilation. The final installment centered around Fleece Firmflanks, uniting the guilds to defeat Chaos. When Chaos appears to have the upper hand against Fleece, Bobbin and the Weavers storm in and help vanquish their adversary once and for all. After the Loom is remade, peace between the guilds is finally restored. Even though a lot of thought was put into the potential sequels, Moriarty said, "This was all just talk. I was busy with other projects, and nobody else felt strongly enough about the games to make a commitment. So Forge and The Fold never got made." Number 4. To the Moon. Mega Man Legends 3. Mega Man Legends never took off like the main franchise, but there's no question this spin-off has a devoted fanbase. Unlike the classic 2D platformer series, Legends was a 3D action adventurer that focused more on character relationships and story. As such, gamers felt a personal connection with the ensemble. So when Mega Man Legends 2 concluded with our titular hero trapped on the moon, players hoped he'd find a way home. But with no sequel in sight, it looks like the Blue Bomber is stuck up there indefinitely. Although unresolved cliffhangers are always disappointing, fans took this one really personally. In fact, they created a Mega Man Legends Facebook group called Get Me Off the Moon to encourage Capcom to greenlight another installment. Despite the fact Legends 3 never saw the light of day, we know what it would have entailed. In the unreleased prototype, Mega would have been rescued by his allies after they joined forces with 2 playable characters, Aero and Barrett. Because 10 missions were designed for Barrett, this new duo would have played a prominent part in the threequel. Even though it's reassuring to know Mega Man made his way home, it's a bummer that we never saw it happen. Number 3. Darth Vader Imprisoned. Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2 concludes with Darth Vader's apprentice, Starkiller, preparing to execute his master. The player is then given a choice to embrace the light side or the dark side. If you indulge your murderous impulses, you'll be slain by a secret Starkiller clone. If you accept the light side, the Sith Lord will be taken away and imprisoned on Starkiller's ship. However, the closing shot shows Boba Fett's Slave 1 closing in on Starkiller's craft, implying Vader is about to be freed. Although the dark side cliffhanger was resolved in the Endor DLC, we never saw how the light side ending played out, since the sequel was cancelled. Now, because TFU2 was a major disappointment, you'd think players weren't keen to see where this cliffhanger was heading. However, plans for the follow-up would intrigue any Star Wars fan. According to lead writer Hayden Blackman, The Force Unleashed 3 would have had Vader break out of his prison, obviously. When he learns the Emperor is seeking a new apprentice, Vader reluctantly teams up with Starkiller to destroy his replacement. This premise is so unique and compelling in the context of Star Wars, it sounds like it could have redeemed the franchise. Since this sequel is indefinitely resting in carbonite, we'll never see it. Number 2, is Steve Burnside alive? Resident Evil Code Veronica. Resident Evil Code Veronica kicks off with Claire Redfield being imprisoned by Umbrella shortly after she raids their facility. After busting out, Claire teams up with another prisoner called Steve Burnside. Even though Steve is distrustful of Claire at first, they become thick as thieves throughout their mission. But after Albert Wesker uses the T-Veronica virus to transform Steve into a mindless monster, Claire is forced to kill him. Before drawing his final breath, Steve professes his love for Claire. If you played the original Dreamcast version, it seemed like Steve's story was finished. But in the PS2 port, there's an extended ending showing Wesker stealing Steve's corpse. He then informs Chris Redfield that he can take a sample of the virus from Steve's body and possibly resurrect him. Cut to 20 years later, and there's still no word of what happened to Steve Burnside. However, this issue was answered. Unfortunately, most Resi fans missed it, since it was only mentioned in the spin-off Resident Evil The Darkside Chronicles. In this rail shooter, we learn Wesker only took Steve's body so he could sell samples to a wealthy drug baron. As for his promise to revive Steve, yep, that was just Wesker lying. It may not be the answer which fans were looking for, but at least we can close the book on Steve Burnside. Number 1, The Awakened ending, Dead Space 3. Because the original Dead Space was so beloved, it seemed impossible for the remake to meet expectations. But against all odds, Dead Space 2023 pulled it off, managing to surpass its predecessor in many ways. Since the survival horror series has had a resurgence in popularity recently, fans should be thrilled. However, many gamers still can't forgive the franchise for how Dead Space 3 turned out. Not only did this installment fail to meet expectations, it ended on a depressing note. But it gets worse. For the Awakened DLC, Dead Space 3 had the chance to wrap everything up in a neat little bow. Instead, the final scene has Isaac Clarke and John Carver return to Earth, only to learn it's surrounded by Brethren moons. Just as one moon is about to collide into the Terra Nova ship, the scene cuts to black. That's right, they pulled a Sopranos. Though Visceral Games had every intention of continuing the saga, the company went under, putting Dead Space 4 on hold. But the big question is, did Isaac and John live? According to creative director Ben Wynant, the answer is yes. However, Dead Space 4 would have been the first installment where Ellie Langford would serve as the protagonist, not Isaac. Throughout the game, Ellie would scavenge for supplies, look for survivors, and gather enough resources to eliminate the necromorphs altogether. In gameplay reminiscent of Dead Space 3's most open-ended middle section. Unfortunately, Wynant and his team are keeping tight-lipped about all other details, just in case Dead Space 4 does get the go-ahead. With the success of the remake, that's now a very real possibility. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other infuriating video game cliffhangers that actually have answers. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists. Thanks!